Hey everybody, Spencer here before the episode. I just want to say thank you so much to Yeoman5 for coming on the show this week. We got to talk about a deck that I'm really excited to test out in Gateshift, which is just kind of a cool deck, cool name. I mean, it plays Scapeshift. What more do you want? And then also just want to give a special shout out to our sponsors over at Pure MTGO. Pure MTGO is the new sponsor of the podcast. We're going to post all of our stuff there every single week, so you can check out some amazing content over there as well as on YouTube. So thank you everybody so much for watching and enjoy this week's episode of Arena Mythicast. Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new episode of Mythicast. It's a surprise episode. I said there wasn't going to be a show this week, but I have a special guest in Adam Yeoman5 Hernandez. How's it going, Yeoman?
That's going all right. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. I'm excited to get to talk to you today. So typically, what I was going to do is I was going to wait till people got the chance to hit Mythic this month. Since it's so early, I was like, well, there's not a lot of people hitting Mythic yet. It takes, roughly 20 hours of gameplay for a lot of people. It's just we haven't had time for that yet. And then I thought, well, I bet I could get on the guy that is doing the most testing that everybody's talking about, and that's you. I was really excited when I saw you talking about the Gateshift decks that you were trying out and how you felt like they were really good. So we're going to talk about that today as a deck that can try and help people get Mythic this month.
Yeah, the Gateshift deck is one of the more powerful decks I've played with in testing. I've played quite a few decks at this point, and it's been just one of the more consistently powerful, where when you just put 14 power of zombies in play on like turn 5, it's pretty hard for some people to beat.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. In preparation for the podcast, I always play the deck that we're going to talk about. As somebody that's played ramp decks, helped people qualify for the Pro Tour with ramp decks, this deck is very close to my heart. As somebody that also helped Mason Clark with Gates to start that format where he played Gates at the SEG. So before we get there, I know that you didn't play a ton last month. So where did you start on the ladder this month, and where did this deck help take you?
I think it was either top of silver or bottom of gold. I don't remember off the top of my head. And I've been hanging around in mid-plat, partly because I've been doing a lot of testing with various decks, some not so great. So I haven't been climbing super quickly to Mythic, but I've been on the rise, and I do think that the Gateshift deck is good enough to be in the top tier of decks, where some of the other decks I've played, like some of the Reanimator lists that are close but not really there, feel a lot more in the like tier 2 fun decks category.
So what do you think keeps the power level of something like Gateshift high, whereas something that's putting in a single creature is not getting there right now? Is it Teferi? Like, what's the reason?
The big reason is that the Gateshift deck plays a much better fair game than a lot of these other decks that feel kind of tier 2, where a lot of these decks, especially early on, are designed to do one thing really well, and when they don't do exactly that thing, they tend to fall flat. Where the Gateshift deck, your fail mode is like playing a Golos, playing field naturally, and just making land drops and making zombies and drawing cards off of something like Guild Summit, where your plan B is actually still really solid.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I found I'm winning most games, is like you just get to 7 lands through your natural ramp progressions. You happen to draw one of your fields, and then when you have a Gate Summon play, just a draw card plus a 2/2 for free is usually a lot for your opponent to overcome. So that's kind of how I've been winning most of the games too. Can I ask, what decks are you playing against? Like, what are the things that you're seeing on the ladder right now that people should be thinking about?
There's a lot of Mono Red is still around. Esper, I've seen a decent amount of. I've seen a couple people messing around with some of the Reanimator stuff. Command is obviously still powerful, still around. Risen Reef is great in that deck. I've actually, since my list went somewhat viral, I've played a couple of mirrors of the Gateshift deck, and those have been interesting. Nexus is definitely a very powerful deck. Some of the best cards in M20 are sideboard cards, and Nexus got some really good ones. So I've played against a fairly wide spectrum of decks, but it's mostly, you've got some of your like blue-green top-end decks, you've still got Esper and Command as your mid-range decks, and then there's Feather, Mono-Red, and Vampires as sort of the aggro triad I've seen around.
Where do you think? Well, maybe we should get into your deck before we talk about kind of where you think the matchups lie with this. Let's move over to the actual deck really quick, and we're looking at your Scapeshift list here on the screen. If you're listening at home, I'll read it off for you. We have 4 Growth Spiral, 4 Gates Ablaze, 3 Guild Summit, 4 Risen Reef, 2 Teferi Time Reveler, 4 Circuitous Route, 4 Scapeshift, 2 Cavalier of Thorns, 3 Golos Tireless Pilgrim, 2 Arcway Angel. The lands are 2 Azorius Guildgate, 1 Boros Guildgate, 4 Breeding Pool, 2 Field of Ruin, 4 Gruul Guildgate, 1 Hollowed Fountain, 2 Izzet Guildgate, 4 Plaza Harmony, 1 Rakdos Guildgate, 1 Selesnya Guildgate, 4 Simic Guildgate, 1 Steam Vents, and 1 Stomping Grounds. So the first thing that I want to say that I really appreciated about this list when playing it is your dedication to having enough lands so that you can play turn 2 Growth Spiral. How consciously did you look at your lands, and the only gate that doesn't cast it, first of all, is I believe the Rakdos Guild gate, and then you have all of your shock lands there to help you play it turn 2 and take 2 life, play another guild gate, and be on time.
So the one thing I do want to catch real quick for the people at home kind of wondering what Field of Ruin is doing in the deck, it's actually Field of the Dead.
Oh, sorry. My bad.
It's all good. And yeah, so all of our guild gates except for Rakdos and Boros.
Oh, Boros too. Sure.
To Growth Spiral. And actually one of the hardest parts of this deck when I initially built it was I spent like 20 or 30 minutes making sure that the mana works, that you could cast Gates Ablaze, you could cast Teferi a reasonable amount of the time, you could cast Growth Spiral like all the time. And you definitely need to be able to hit Circuitous Route on time all the time.
Yeah, one of the problems that I had with a lot of Gates lists from months ago, right, when the deck first came out of the scene and people were trying different versions of it, was that people didn't have a way to commonly cast their turn 2 Growth Spiral, which made their Circuitous Routes worse, which, I mean, it was really rough to play those decks and have Growth Spiral be your first play really late in the game. You actually have enough shock lands here that I think your percentage is pretty high. It sounds like that was conscious.
Yes, I made a very conscious effort to make sure that we could cast Growth Spiral, because if you don't have the ability to cast it, if you're like playing it on turn 3 is okay, but playing it on turn 2 makes your deck much more powerful, where you're able to put an extra tap land into play ahead of time so that you can then play your untapped lands later to do things like Circuitous Route or Golos or Cavalier of Thorns, where you need to be able to play those cards with untapped mana on time.
So on the deck, you know, the first card is the card that I messed up on that we should probably talk about first, and that is Field of the Dead. Why don't you talk about that card really quick?
So Field of the Dead, I'm going to read it off real quick, just in case people haven't seen much of it yet. It is a fairly new card. We've only got 5 days of the set so far. So Field of the Dead enters the battlefield taps for colorless, and then whenever Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, put a 2/2 zombie into play. And so Field of the Dead is a very powerful way to have spells and threats in your lands. And especially when you play cards like Golos and Scapeshift and Circuitous Route, it's very easy to hit that requirement. When you have 7 lands, you just have 7 different names, and you make a zombie every single time. And especially with something like Circuitous Route, which will put 2 zombies into play because you're getting 2, or Scapeshift, where on 7 lands, you just go pick 7 new lands, almost like Valakut. Just instead of 7 bolts, you're getting 7 zombies, which is still pretty good for standard. And if you ever hit 8 lands and you get to do 2 Field of the Dead, for every land you put in, you get 2 zombies. And most people are just not going to be able to contest with that.
One of the things that I quickly noticed that when you read the card for the first time, and I'm not the only person that said this, is you think that the zombies come into play tapped because that's just a normal zombies feature. That's actually not true with this card.
Nope, they come in untapped, ready to block. And if you have Teferi, you can end step some of these zombies. And
I've done that. I did that on stream yesterday. And, you know, being able to, plus Teferi, put in a Scapeshift or a Circuitous Route or things like that, people not prepared for that. Is that one of the reasons that you have Teferi in the deck, is to help with that, or just because of how bad the Nexus matchup is?
It's a little of everything. So Teferi being able to end step things is very powerful. Teferi being able to buy time in just the bounce something, draw a card is also very powerful. Rebuying your own spells in this deck is also incredibly powerful. I don't know if you've ever picked up a Guild Summit and played it again, but that is the most nonsensically value-centric play I've made in this format yet, I think.
I have not done that, but I should do that. That sounds great.
Bouncing Arcway Angel to gain a lot of life in some of these matchups is incredible.
Sure.
Rebuying Golos or even Risen Reef sometimes when you're just in a bad spot. So Teferi just kind of hits a lot of angles, helps stop people from countering your scape shifts, which is important, and just fills in where you can't really afford a lot of him because of the mana base.
Sure.
But he helps out here and there, especially in those late game scenarios against something like Esper, where end stepping escape shift or making sure your escape shift resolves is really powerful.
Cavalier of Thorns is another one in the deck. It's 2 green, green, green. That's for a 5/6 reach. When it ETBs, you look at the top 5, put a land into play, put the rest into your graveyard. When it dies, you can, I believe, you exile it to put one of those cards on, or one of the cards in your graveyard on top of your deck.
Yep.
Did you have to adjust your mana base at all to fit Cavalier of Thorns into the main?
Not really, because we've already got something like, 14 green sources plus 4 plazas.
Sure.
So
Plus the Securitas roots.
And Securitas Root and Golos and all that, I haven't had to work too hard for it, and it is just this gigantic body that blocks Charging Monster Sword, blocks Rekindling Thing, it blocks everything that can oftentimes survive a Gates Ablaze, and that is a very helpful card that also still helps ramp you up into that 7 mana or 7 land spot that's so important with Scape Shift.
One of the things that I found was really interesting specifically with this card was with the old versions of this deck, one of the big problematic cards for you was a Danto Vanguard, and having a creature that can block it even after it gets +1/+1, unlike Arcway Angel, was actually really valuable. It happened on stream where once I played the Cavalier of Thorns, I had the board completely locked up, and a matchup that was always kind of really close to always falling apart for you was actually not that bad.
Yeah, Golos and Cavalier both being really good blockers is incredible, especially if Risen Reef or Ghost Spiral let you put them in a turn early where, you go 3 lands into 5 lands into 7 lands, and you still have a reasonable way to block so that you're not forced to cast Gates Ablaze and you're free to cast Securitas Root or Scape Shift to just get there.
Yeah, let's talk about bridge spells really quickly. So we kind of talked about this last week on the show with our last guest, but one of the things that these ramp decks really need are decks that get you in the time where your opponents are playing their mid game and trying to build up their powerful things. You're still trying to bridge yourself to the late game or trying to get there faster. So why don't you talk to me about Gates Ablaze and Risen Reef, and even a little bit about Teferi as your spells that bridge you to your 5 drops that get you to that 7 mana.
Yeah, so Gates Ablaze is just the most powerful one. It is one of the big Gates payoffs that we are Gates for, other than things like Circuitous Route. And it is just this board wipe that scales really, really well, where some of these other ones like Deafening Clarion, they tend to get outscaled fairly quickly, especially when people are playing things like Cavalier of Thorns or people are playing just dinosaurs that all have huge amounts of toughness. Where Gates Ablaze, especially after Circuitous Route, not only costs 3 as a cheaper way to catch you back up, also scales incredibly hard so that it's almost always just going to wipe everything that is not like a Rekindling Phoenix or a Danto Vanguard that has a way to just naturally resist a Wrath. So Gates Ablaze is a very powerful way to empty the board so that you are free to do Circuitous Route, which is otherwise a relatively mopey card. And Risen Reef sort of helps on a similar angle, where it also ramps you, but sits there and blocks, where even just blocking once can often buy you more than enough time. And if Risen Reef gets to stick around and help with a Cavalier or a second Risen Reef, then you are really accelerating your game plan into your late game.
Yeah, in previous versions of this deck, I had played a lot of Elvish Rejuvenator as kind of this bridge spell that lets me just get a single block off, can also hold off X1s while just getting a land into play to get you closer to the things that you're trying to do in the Gates deck. This card does a lot of similar things, but kind of has more upside. Do you want to talk about the two versus each other a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things about Risen Reef is that it actually doesn't have a fail rate. Where Elvish Rejuvenator, if you can still play it in a deck like this with 28 lands, and it has a pretty high hit rate, but anytime it misses, it's just an awful card.
Right.
Risen Reef never has that problem, and you actually benefit from drawing additional cards, right? Where if you have lands but no Scape Shift, or you just need to continue to draw spells, where especially one of the things I think a lot of people miss with this deck is that you can mulligan pretty well, and you should mulligan your 7 a decent amount of the time if it's not going to get you there. And cards like Risen Reef and Golos and Cavalier and even Guild Summit can help you catch back up and make sure you don't run out of cards before you hit enough lands to Scape Shift people.
And one of the first things that I noticed the difference for me was the first Elvish Rejuvenator was always just like, yeah, this is pretty good. Like I'm ahead on mana now. I have a blocker. But the second one was always like, oh, I really didn't want to draw this. Whereas the second Risen Reef is actually really good, especially if you already have one in play.
Yep.
Which is, I don't know, that's a very different feeling than the Elvish Rejuvenator. So it was a nice change of pace for me. And then obviously the synergy with Cavalier of Thorns was, chef's kiss.
Yeah. No, if you ever go Risen Reef into Cavalier of Thorns, you just put 2 more lands into play, and your opponent's like, hang on, you're going to turn 4 Cavalier, turn 5 Scape Shift for 8 lands? Wait, hold on.
Yeah, yep, done that. Been there. Do you find that you get a lot of concessions on your Scape Shift? We can talk about that card really quickly, too. Scape Shift in this deck may look a little bit weird, but I've cast them to get just a couple of zombies and draw an extra couple of cards at times. How is this card fitting into this game plan for you?
So Scape Shift is, for all intents and purposes, the A plan of this deck. Your goal is to put 7 lands or more in play, and then Scape Shift them for just an amount of zombies that they're just not going to beat.
Right.
Some people are going to be able to clear a wave of zombies or even a second wave of zombies. But one of the sweet things about Field of the Dead is that even if you Scape Shift, you sort of blow your combo, and then they wipe your board, you can often still just play a land drop for turn, and suddenly you have 2 more zombies.
Right.
You just do this every turn, and it's this unrelenting combo that sort of continues after you've gone off.
Yeah, that's what I noticed. I got double Cry of the Carnarium on stream yesterday, and still won very easily. I mean, they just could not beat Guild Summit plus Field of the Dead in play. It just was too much.
Yeah, you build this engine, and that's what is really, again, going back to talking about some of these other decks that don't quite get there, where this deck has a really good, even if somebody can answer what you're doing, or you don't get there on the full combo, like, the rest of your pieces are still engine pieces that work by themselves and with each other, even if you don't pull off the full Scape Shift combo.
Sure. What do you think is the coolest interaction in this deck? Like, what's the thing that when you do it, you just kind of feel the sweetest?
I mean, there's obviously Scape Shift on their end stuff, attack them with 40 zombies is
to fairy.
Golos is also pretty sweet, and I think one of the things that you don't get to do in any other deck, and is unfortunately one of the things where you have to be careful with, especially a lot of people on Arena where they don't have as many wild cards, where this deck has a lot of wild cards that just don't go anywhere else. Like Golos and Scape Shift aren't really going to fit anywhere but here.
Sure.
But Golos being able to just look at the top 3, and it doesn't even say cast. You can make land drops off of it.
Right.
You can play those cards this turn without paying any mana for them. I've had some ludicrous Golos turns where it's just like Golos, land for turn, Scape Shift, Angel.
Should we talk about the Rakdos Guildgate and kind of how to play with it as it's your only black land with your Goloses?
Yeah, I can actually go ahead. We'll talk about both Scape Shift and Circuitous Route sequencing. I did have a little bit written up for this, where one of the things you need to be careful about is planning ahead, right? So if you have a Golos in hand or a Scape Shift in hand, that changes the way you want to cast your Circuitous Route. If you're planning to Scape Shift in the near future, what you want to do is fix your mana if you need to, but try and take all of the guild gates that you have duplicates of, so that when you Scape Shift later, and especially if you Scape Shift again a second time, you can still grab different named cards, right? So if you already have the colors you need for playing, you already have your red for your Gates Ablaze, you already have blue and green, you can just grab 2 Summit Guild Gates or 2 Gruul Guild Gates or 1 of each, just to make sure that you hit all of your lands, and you're planning to Scape Shift later. And especially if you're planning to Scape Shift, don't grab your Rakdos Guildgate the first time you cast Circuitous Route, because if you sack it, you're not going to be able to activate Golos later. However, if you aren't planning to Scape Shift, and let's say you have a natural field that you played earlier on, then you want to go ahead and grab different names. again, you want to largely avoid Rakdos Guildgate unless you are going to be Golosing in the very near future, because you want your scape shifts to be able to grab as many lands as possible. Because thinning your deck is actually really powerful, especially if you're going to have a Golos active.
Right.
And once all of your deck is live, you've got no more lands left. You want the lands left in play to be able to activate Golos and cast all of your spells.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So, that answered exactly the question that I wanted covered on that. Let's move on to the sideboard really quickly, and then we can kind of circle our way back to some of the questions about the main deck. We have 3 Veil of Summer, 3 Ether Gust, 2 Cerulean Drake, 2 Fry, 2 Deafening Clarion, 2 Shifting Ceratops, and 1 more Arcway Angel. I know that this deck is new. The sideboard is probably could be as many as 10 cards off from the sideboard that you would end up with if you were going to play Grand Prix next week. But kind of talk to me about what this has, and then what you're thinking as far as other options and what you've also tried.
Sure. So one of the big things I want to talk about is Aether Gust is actually a card I missed in the first sideboard for this deck, and it actually solves so many problems. Where Aether Gust is a card that can answer Rekindling Phoenix, Experimental Frenzy, it can answer Nissa, it can answer Wilderness Reclamation, it can answer so many cards in so few slots, where you have your anti-red card, your anti-Nexus cards, where they're almost better than Counterspell because they're also going to be playing Veil of Summer. And it helps patch up a lot of spots while also just being super wide, where it's good against the Dinosaurs deck. It's almost ridiculous how well some of these cards answer some of these other decks. Same thing for Fry, where you have a card that can kill Teferi, it can kill Lyra, or any of the sideboard cards after you've brought out all of your Gates of Blazes against something like Control, and it answers all of their threats while also being something good against Mono White, where you can answer things like Benelish Marshal, or Gideon, who's actually really problematic otherwise because you can't kill Gideon with any other card in the deck.
Yeah, I top decked this against a Gideon on stream yesterday. I was like, oh, that was a really good draw.
Cerulean Drake, obviously very good against Mono Red. That's one of those cards that I'm less sure on, but it's so good against Mono Red when you have it that I like it a lot, because also it doesn't die to Gates of Blaze or Deafening Clarion.
Right, that makes a lot of sense.
Secretly amazing, because Rekindling Phoenix is also a card that you can have trouble answering.
Yeah, that was actually my first thought when I saw it, is that this blocks a Rekindling Phoenix forever, which...
Or Chain Whirler.
Yeah, or Chain Whirler, that's true too. Which this deck, can have some trouble with... I mean, we already mentioned both of them, the Adondo Vanguard and the Phoenix, and this seems like a clean answer to Phoenix to me.
Yeah. Shifting Ceratops is actually... I've been trying either bringing it in or not bringing it in against Esper.
Yeah.
It's mostly very good against Nexus of Fate and against Mono Blue, which has seen a reasonable amount of popularity right off the bat. I don't know how long that will stay, as long as when people get back to Teferi. Right. But until then, Shifting Ceratops is a very powerful card, because Mono Blue basically you can't beat it.
Yeah. And you have a hard time with Mono Blue in a lot of situations, so having a card that's very, very good against that is big game. That was something that I thought of when I saw it also.
Yeah, Ceratops and Fry are a really big game where they can't counter it. They can still dive down your Fry, just be careful about that, but those cards are both very good at helping shore up the Mono Blue matchup, which is otherwise pretty rough because you're trying to cast expensive instants and sorceries where they have Spell Pierces and Wizard's Retorts, and it's a pretty scary matchup.
Sure, that makes a ton of sense to me. Let's talk really quickly about kind of V1 of this deck. I won't have it on screen here, but why don't you talk to me about kind of the evolution of this deck and what you've tried in the past?
Sure. So actually the first version I tried was very, very close to what I ended up with. It was something I even talked about on Hardcast, because I had been testing the deck right before we podcasted and was like, wow, actually this deck is something, where I didn't have all the Resin Reefs. I had maximum Golos. I had like an extra Teferi. The sideboard had like negates, and the Cavaliers were in the sideboard. But one of the things I had originally was 4 Chandras as the extra payoff for if you cast Circuitous Root and then don't have Scape Shift. Chandra is okay. But while Chandra was good against Nexus, just like they're going to take a damage for every turn they take, and Chandra was okay at wiping boards, there's a lot of random elementals in the set where Chandra can't quite answer them. And having something like Aether Gust made the other matchups where Chandra was good less necessary, where you had cheaper ways to interact with what they were doing instead of trying to just hope you get a Chandra in play on like turn 4 or turn 5.
Yeah, I looked at your old list, and it was funny because immediately playing the deck, the first thing I thought is I kind of wish that I had like one less Gateshift and like a big spell in that slot. And I thought about Chandra, and I've been playing a ton of elementals, and I thought, the number of times where Chandra's minus doesn't actually wipe the board in this set is actually pretty high. So that might not be the big spell that you want. I do have a question though. Have you thought about Ugin in place of one of the Scapeshifts?
I have not thought about Ugin specific. Like I have thought about it, but I think Ugin does too few things, if that makes sense. Where Ugin is this like 6 mana Vindicate that then makes 2/2s, which is okay, but it seems like it doesn't do enough. Where it's like the only thing it can do is help cast Golos a little bit cheaper if you want to do that for like 10 mana instead of 12 mana.
Sure.
And it's really awkward if you strand some of your like Field of the Deads under 2/2s.
That's actually a really good point that I didn't think of. Okay.
But
is there anything from the V1 or anything that you would change in this version of the deck that, or anything you're thinking about?
The main things I'm thinking about is potentially putting Negates or Disdainful Strokes back in the sideboard somewhere. Veil of Summer has been very good to protect your spells, but some things like Command the Dreadhorde are not something you can stop with Veil of Summer or Aether Gust, where Aether Gust is still really good and your best counterspell against stuff like Nexus.
Sure.
I think getting some number of counterspells back in to help against Command the Dreadhorde or some of the other big spell decks would be very helpful. Where Command is a matchup that doesn't sound like it should be too scary. They can't really stop anything you're doing. But the big issue is that they can get to an unhealthy high life total where you can make like 40 zombies and they can just take the hit.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they'll have something like Massacre Girl where they can continually wipe your board as long as they have Command the Dreadhorde. So that's one of those where if I could stop the command chain, like even just stopping the first one could be a huge swing in some of the matchups.
Do you lean more towards Disdainful Stroke or more towards Negate for that?
I am tempted to go more towards Disdainful Stroke because it also stops things like Massacre Girl. You can stop an early Cavalier of Thorns. It's a little more flexible once you already have Aether Gust for a lot of the other things that you'd like to negate.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool. All right. Well, I don't have any more questions specifically about this deck. Are there any tips and tricks that you want people to know about if they're going to try this in the arena?
Yeah, I want to quick touch on just the kinds of cards. I'm not going to be giving like a super in-depth sideboard plan, but I do want to give people tips. That is one of the big things I've been getting a lot of questions about. Of what are the kinds of cards you take out? What are the kind of cards you bring in? Do you ever cut skip? Do you ever take out all of Guild Summits and things like that? So one of the big things against aggro is Teferi often is not very good against them because their spells are so cheap. They can replay them, especially something like Mono Red. They all come with some additional value tied to them, and you can't afford to spend 3 mana for their 1 mana. So Teferi, Guild Summit, these are cards that can come out because they're not very good bridges anymore, and you can bring in better cards like Deafening Clarion, you can bring in Cerulean Drake, you can bring in Aether Gust, and that helps, or obviously tailored towards which colors of aggro you're playing against, but you want to take out some of your value-based bridges and bring in just more spot removal and sweepers where they can actually kill things. And again, keep some of that in mind where you don't bring in Deafening Clarion against dinosaurs. It's not really going to kill anything, but Aether Gust is super good there. Obviously against Mono Blue, Aether Gust is going to do nothing. Bring in your Ceratops, bring in Clarion, things like that. I generally have not been cutting Scapeshift just because, especially against aggro, it is your number one way to turn the corner and slam the door all at once, where you're really behind, you cast Scapeshift on 7 lands, 8 lands, you gain 3 life, you make 1,000,000 zombies. If you have more lands, you gain even more life, you get even more zombies, and it basically gives them 1 turn to burn you out, and that's it.
Yeah, that was my number one thing that I was impressed with, was just the ability to halt everything that's happened. Even against Mono White, I just played it and I was like, oh, they actually just can't attack, and now I mean, if I draw anything else in this game, it's just over, and they might just be over now. So that was something that surprised me.
Yeah. And even in some of these matchups where you can just, don't be afraid to cast Scapeshift against Mono Red on 5 lands to just get 2 gates and 3 Plaza of Harmony, gain 9 life, just give yourself some time to play your more powerful spells.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are the bad matchups? Like, what are the matchups that you're actually actively worried about?
Things like Nexus and the Omniflood style decks, which I helped popularize. I don't think they're that good right now, but those matchups where they can just go even more over the top of you, where you kind of ironically don't have a really good late game. You just have a very accelerated and powerful mid game, and you try to finish it off by just a stream of cards and zombies. Nexus is just going to go, okay, you've made a million zombies. I'm now going to take every single turn and win the game. Omniflood is going to pick up all of your stuff, put an omniscience into play, and then win the game. Where they win even more on the spot than you, and have ways to deal with what you're doing. Where just Root Snare just makes your zombies embarrassing.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think that the root snare versions of Nexus are better than the very new root snare versions of Nexus right now?
Yes, I think Nexus is actually this deck and Nexus, like Gateshift and Nexus, are probably my two frontrunners for the tournament I'm playing on Saturday. I do think Nexus is very, very good right now because some of its bad matchups, it got really good sideboard cards for. Like Mono Red was probably the worst matchup, and you now have Cerulean Drake and Aether Gust, and that is huge. But do you want to touch on a couple more things with the sideboard real quick before we move too much into like talking about the metagame or this weekend? Sure. Control, obviously you can take out a bunch of the Gates of Blazes, you can take out Archway Angels, they're not going to burn you out. Bring in the like Veil of Summers or Fries, just depending on what colors of control you're playing against, obviously. But I've played against stuff like Grixis, and they just have no way to actually beat a Field of the Dead. It's kind of embarrassing. So I'm not worried too much about those, but just take out your board wipes, take out your creature removal, and bring in ways to either kill their planeswalkers or stop them from interacting with your spells.
That makes
mid-range a little bit weird because it's so wide right now. It can do like Command the Dreadhorde, Dinosaurs, Gruul. Even there's some Esper mid-ranges still. And a lot of that is sort of look at what they're doing that you care about. So if it's Command the Dreadhorde, if it's giant creatures early and ahead of time, if it's just a pile of planeswalkers in the case of Esper, figure out what it is that they're doing that matters to you, because oftentimes it's not the small value creatures, and bring in ways to deal with that. Take out a lot of, like, even against some of the Dinosaurs decks, like Archway Angel is a little bit too small to matter there. You can gain life, but they're often attacking you for 10 or 12 at a time. And Archway Angel is not a very good blocker there. So you can take cards like that out for cards that matter more, like Aether Gust. It sounds like the ever unhelpful adage of take out bad cards, put in good cards, sure. But think a lot about what they're doing that matters to you, sort of in the same way that in Nexus, you look at what they're doing that matters to you, where you have Root Snare, their creatures don't matter, but if they have Burn, if they have counter spells, those are the cards that you care about.
I have a question about the Dreadhorde matchup, because Aether Gust seems to play an interesting role in that, where you're actually able to slow them down quite a bit by putting their Wild Growth Walkers on top of their deck in response to them casting it. Is that something that you find yourself firing that off that quickly, or do you still wait?
It really depends. I will often leave it in play to let them try and cast Explorer creatures and then get it.
Sorry, that's what I meant. In response to like a Jade Light Ranger, you do it.
Right. Well, I wouldn't do it immediately, but them gaining life can actually be a bit of a problem. So as long as you can put it on top, and putting their library makes it way better than actually killing it, because they don't get to Dreadhorde it back.
Right.
Often Aether Gust gets used on like a Tameo as well, just because if they try to turn 4 Tameo and you just Aether Gust it, like oftentimes they have like nothing in play, and you can then continue, and if they play Tameo again, it's often too late for a Command the Dreadhorde to matter. You basically force them to recast Tameo, which is just an entire another turn that they give you.
Right,
that makes a lot of sense. An extra turn for all of their life, all their Command the Dreadhorde, all their self-milling. Oftentimes even like they'll miss a land drop sometimes if you do that.
Sure.
It's a really powerful way to slow them down and then escape shift them when they can't deal with escape shift.
Sure. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Anything else on the sideboard?
Let's see. We talked about aggro control. We talked a little bit about dealing with Nexus. Again, one of just as a last sideboard quick hit of very few things in here are bad standalone, but don't be afraid to take things like Risen Reef is not a sacred cow. You can trim that in some matchups where it doesn't actually do the thing that matters, or if you are, especially in some, it's mostly I will do that in I think I've done it a little bit in mono red, where Risen Reef doesn't actually block very well, and I needed to get in things like Cerulean Drake, which are just better early cards against them. Where you don't want to cut Scapeshift, you don't really want to cut Circuitous Root, but things like Golos you can trim on, Guild Summits, you can take some of these engine cards out when you don't need to go as hard on the engine because you can just win with a Scapeshift, and so you want to set yourself up to survive and cast a big Scapeshift.
All right, that makes a ton of sense to me. Yeah, I think we also kind of covered the good and bad matchups here. I think we given some tips and tricks. It's funny. It's funny how often we see Teferi as not just the thing that it does, where it's bouncing your opponent's creatures and like being a reflector mage that's a grand abolisher, but also like being able to reset your archangels, reset your ETB effects. It's funny how often that is coming up when you think about looping Oath of Kaias and stuff like that. The Esper decks, the card just does a lot. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, that is gonna do it for this week. Thank you so much to you, Adam, for coming on. I really appreciate you coming on, talking about this deck that you've been working on. Where can people find you?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. You can find me on Twitter at Yeoman_5 because somebody took my handle. You can find me on Twitch and Patreon and basically everywhere else as just Yeoman5.
Sure. And then you just started a new podcast. If
that's... Yes, I've picked up with the rebirth of Hardcast MTG. I'm doing that podcast with Kevin and Aaron Barrich. I do write articles at gampodcast.com every now and then. You can also, if you're curious to see me, I will be indeed playing this deck. I don't know what time this podcast will go up, but I do stream every Monday night. And if you're around Eastern time, around 5:30, you can see me play. I'm almost certainly going to be playing this deck tomorrow because everyone wants to see it.
Awesome. Well, this will be up by then, so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'll have this out because people have been asking for a deep dive. I don't really have the time to do a full article with well written out and all of that, but can do 45 minutes for a podcast, give everybody that deep dive that they're looking for.
Awesome.
And thank you for having me on. It's been great.
Yeah, it was really fun. It's a deck that personally, like, I know that I'm considering taking to Denver just because I've played more ramp decks than anything else in Magic, so this is one that hits close to home for me. So you can find the rest of the stuff over on the Constructive Criticism Network if you're looking for constructive criticism. If you're looking for different podcasts to help you improve at Magic, that's a place to go. Thank you to all the shows on there. You can find me at Spencer13H. You can find this podcast at ArenaCast, Arena Mythic Cast on Twitter. Once again, thank you so much, Adam. This was fun.
It's been fun.
All right. Well, we will talk to everybody next week for another episode of Mythic Cast.